Hello and welcome to another episode of Full Court Finance here at Zacks. I'm your host, Ben Rains. In this week, a week after we talked about how the National Football League's TV ratings were up through the first 5 weeks of the season, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the big business of the NBA because they're on an upward trend, whereas a lot of people are thinking and assuming that the NFL is trending in the opposite direction. But before we do that, as always, I want to say, remember, if you have any questions or episode suggestions, please feel free to shoot us an email over at podcast@zacks.com. So as I mentioned last week, the NFL ratings were up slightly through the first 5 weeks of the season, up 3% according to Nielsen, yet they were still down big last season, roughly 9% in 2017. Meanwhile, as some people might have heard of already, last season the NBA's ratings were up pretty big. They were up their biggest in 4 years during the 2017-18 season, with national TV games up 8%, which is pretty crazy. So NFL games not down 9%, NBA games up 8% during that comparable season. And this is across their national TV games on ABC, ESPN, NBA TV, and TNT, according to Nielsen. ABC saw their ratings jump 17%, which is pretty significant, and then games on TNT were up 13%, which I find pretty interesting, considering that you'll hear a lot about how the storyline of it's the Warriors and they're going to win no matter what. But clearly people are still tuning in, and I think a lot of that has to do with, unlike the NFL, obviously there's a lot of drama going on with the NFL, but there's a lot of player movement drama, and there's so many stars in the NBA where it's a really star-driven league. So most of these nights where it's either a TNT game on a Thursday night or an ESPN game on a Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, there's pretty much going to be a big star, either Steph Curry or LeBron or James Harden or some of these younger guys like Joel Embiid, whereas the NFL, it's more of a team-driven league where, as I said, that kind of like soccer for some fans in America, they're really following a star, and that's helped at a time when it seems like the Golden State Warriors are going to win and really no one else has a chance. But who knows? Anything can happen, especially if someone gets hurt this season. But definitely going in to this season, as it started early last week, you're going to hear the talk of how the Warriors are trying to three-peat and go for their fourth title in 5 seasons. And then other big news is LeBron is in LA, which is good news for the NBA and their TV partners, because LA is, as most people know, a massive TV market. So that's great for the sport and all of their marketing partners as well. And then a little bit more about the TV deals, since the ratings were up last season, which is great for ESPN and TNT because those are the two big national partners. So that's Disney, which owns both ESPN and ABC, which there are also games on, and then TNT, owned by Turner Sports, which is now actually owned by AT&T. So they're on a 9-year, $24 billion deal, which took effect during the 2016-17 season, with the companies paying a combined $2.6 billion annually, running through the end of the 2024-25 season. And that deal was worth 180% more annually than the previous deal, which it's pretty much that's how it's going to go, I would see, for the foreseeable future, as long as live sports continue to be really the only thing that advertisers and anyone needs to watch live going forward. And this was interesting. This was something I looked up recently, which I guess I could have guessed how much an ad for an NBA Finals game would have cost, because most of the time when you talk about live sports ads, it's pretty much the Super Bowl is the only figure anyone would ever really hazard a guess at. So the cost to advertise up front, so before like the season started, for game 1 of the NBA Finals was up 53% last season to $535,000, and then those skyrocketed to almost $900,000 if you wanted to buy ad space closer to the actual final starting. For reference, Super Bowl 2018, it cost $5 million, for a 30-second ad spot. But once again, that's a Super Bowl. That's only one game. The NBA Finals could go as many as 7 games. Same thing with the NBA in general. Less fans watch every game, but there's 82 of them compared to the NFL, where there's only 16 games during the regular season. And then what's also really interesting and great sign for the NBA going forward, another sign that they're really trending in the right direction, is that the league's marketing and advertising partners spent 31% more money last season, and this is according to, and that was at just over $1.1 billion, and this is according to IEG/ESP, which is a division of the ad agency WPP. And that was just behind the NFL's $1.25 billion, which is pretty crazy considering that most people consider the NFL just by far the most dominant sport in North America. But once again, the length of the NBA's schedule plays in their favor there. And then a big part of this, or at least a big part of the small or the big 30% jump, was that for the first time in NBA history, and really the first time in major North American sports history, you had companies now being able to buy a part of that on-court jersey. So players now in the NBA, starting last season, you could see a big. They say it's a 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch patch. It kind of varies depending on what the company looks like, what their logo looks like, but that's right on the jerseys that the players wear that the fans then buy, which is something that European soccer and soccer in general has done for a long time. So last year you had to start the season, 21 out of the 30 NBA teams had a marketing partner for their sponsorship patch, with some big names like the Chicago Bulls and the Houston Rockets taking the court all of last season without a marketing partner. Interestingly enough, both of those teams signed deals within the last couple weeks before the start of this season, with Houston signing, they're the Rockets, they signed fittingly with a company called Rockit, ROKIT, Rocket Phones. They're a discount phone company that I had never heard of, and that's probably why they decided to start sponsoring an NBA team, to get in front of an audience on a regular, nationally televised basis. They're also now have a huge deal with the LA Chargers. Meanwhile, the Chicago Bulls signed a corporate patch deal with an online eyeglass company, Zini Optical, which once again I had never heard of. I don't wear glasses, but I tend to know a lot about companies that are coming up, and I had never heard of them. They sell really inexpensive eyeglasses. Not necessarily that they look cheap, but they are very cheap compared to a lot of these companies, way cheaper even than the price point of Warby Parker, which started as an online company and now slowly has lots of brick and mortar retail all over the place. And then the Phoenix Suns signed with a company that's pretty well known to a lot of investors, and they signed a deal with PayPal this past offseason. So you'll see the big PayPal patch on the Phoenix Suns jerseys this year. And then last year, a lot of these have carried over. You had General Electric sponsoring, Harley Davidson, Western Union, eBay, well, not eBay, but eBay owns StubHub. So StubHub sponsored a team. You had Fitbit sponsoring the Minnesota Timberwolves. And then Japanese electronics firm Rakuten is the official sponsor of the Warriors. They paid reportedly the most money in a multi-year deal. The full scopes of the deal weren't available, but they paid reportedly $20 million to sponsor the Golden State Warriors, which will help them get a ton of exposure because they are the biggest, most popular team in the NBA, and then obviously the most popular basketball team in the world because of that. And then this company also happens to be the sponsor of another insanely popular sports team, and that is FC Barcelona, the soccer team that Lionel Messi plays for. And then you had Goodyear Tires, who's now, unfortunately, the sponsor of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Without LeBron James, was the second biggest jersey patch deal last season. And then the surprise winner this year is likely going to be Wish.com, for those of you who have never heard of it. I only heard of it last year when they sponsored the Lakers. So once again, I mean, I know I'm not the best case point of why these companies are doing it, but it does give you instant exposure to anyone that's watching the NBA. Wish.com is an ultra discount e-commerce company founded in early 2010, and it was last valued at about $1.3 billion. It doesn't have any plans to go public yet, but it's really trying to compete at lower price points compared to some of its competitors, but it considers itself a competitor to Amazon, Alibaba, even places like Walmart, and they're the big winner because now LeBron's in LA, so they're going to get a lot of exposure for their ultra discount e-commerce site. So good for them. And then on average, the patch deals are worth about $6.5 million per season. But then on top of these patch deals, really where a lot of the marketing dollars are coming from are the big blue chip companies that have been sponsors of the NBA for a while, and that is Anheuser-Busch InBev, American Express, and Frito-Lay and Gatorade, which are both a part of PepsiCo, State Farm, which is actually supposedly the number one most active NBA sponsor, according to that same ad agency. And as I said, that's where a lot of the money comes in for the NBA. And then on top of that, you have Nike starting its second season of their 8-year, roughly $1 billion deal to be the official sportswear sponsor, jersey sponsor of the NBA. And they took over from Adidas, their big German rival, and their contract, when they signed it, represented a 245% annual increase. So the NBA is a big thing for Nike, and they went all in on a sport that they consider to be one of their bread and butter things, because Nike reportedly has about 90% market share of the basketball shoe market. Adidas has tried to penetrate that basketball shoe market. They've done more of a better job with getting not basketball shoes, but just everyday, more of these sportswear style shoes, not basketball shoes. Meanwhile, you have Under Armour, which has struggled, in my mind, to grow its business in the right places. This past off season, actually within the last month or so, they announced that they signed 2 new NBA players. Obviously, they had Steph Curry. He's their big main star. He's also one of the biggest stars in the NBA. But they just signed one of the younger NBA stars who people might have heard of. He plays for the 76ers. That is Joel Embiid. And then they signed rookie Mo Bamba. And they're both the only problem here is they're both big men, and there's always been the cliche that big men don't sell shoes. So we'll see if this ends up working out for them. But at least Under Armour's trying to put themselves out a little bit more in terms of brand presence within the NBA. And there's also another company that hasn't been in the NBA for 20 years, and that is Puma basketball. You're going to see a lot of Puma this year as they get back into the business of basketball. They've signed a bunch of players over the last couple months in the lead up to the season, and then they just recently signed DeMarcus Cousins, who's a multiple-time NBA All-Star who was playing with the Golden State Warriors, funny enough, this season. So the Warriors, at one point when DeMarcus gets back, could be starting 5 multiple-time All-Stars, which is absolutely insane. But we're not really going to get into that today. And then they also signed, besides DeMarcus, they signed Terry Rozier and Rudy Gay, who are both veteran players. And then the rest of the crop of players they've signed are young stars this year, rookies DeAndre Ayton and Marvin Bagley III, as well as some other rookies. And what's funny is I think that Puma has a better chance quickly to surpass Under Armour in terms of their presence in basketball and people actually wearing these in high school or lower levels or just in pickup games, because I think the one shoe they have out now, which is their Clyde Court Disrupts, which is for Clyde Drexler, who was one of original Puma basketball athlete. I just think they look better, and this is just my opinion, but they also have the star power at the top to bring in a lot of these NBA players because Jay-Z, Sean Carter, is the official creative director at Puma. And he can also funnel some of his clients through his Rock Nation sports agency, which is part of the larger Rock Nation agency in general, to Puma, which could really help them out in the long term. So there's a lot of sneaker wars going on. And then some outlier brands you might have heard of, which are two smaller Chinese companies, which are not small in China, but they have very little presence here in the States, and that is Anta. ANTA is a Chinese brand that sponsors the Warriors' Klay Thompson, and they actually just signed, right before the season started, signed Celtics star Gordon Hayward. And there is another company from the world's second largest economy that is in the NBA, and that is Li Ning, and they work pretty much exclusively with Dwayne Wade of the Miami Heat for his Way of Wade shoes, which I actually think are pretty good-looking sneakers. But yeah, as we can tell, the business of shoes in the NBA is growing a little bit more crowded. Obviously, Nike still dominates it with by far sponsoring the biggest stars and the most amount of NBA players. But I definitely say pay attention to Puma more than any of these companies, even maybe Adidas in terms of actual on-the-court basketball shoes. I really think they could make a big push with some of the stars they've signed and just the way the shoes themselves look. But I also want to now transition into how people can watch the NBA this season and maybe what might be considered some unique ways. I know on the top we touched on the NBA's ratings. So going forward, they're definitely going to try to do more. They're going to offer fans more ways to watch the games, as people have slowly, as we've now heard way too many times everywhere, cut the cord. But it's just the truth. So the NBA has kind of been out front of these options of how to watch the games in non-traditional ways. So obviously you can watch the games on ESPN and TNT and ABC and NBA TV, and then all the regional sports networks that host their city's teams. But then you can watch all of the nationally televised games through these skinny streaming bundles. There are obviously a lot of these skinny streaming bundles, but only a select few have access to all of the NBA national games. And that is Sling TV, Hulu with live programming, PlayStation View, and then DirecTV Now and YouTube TV, which actually last year became the first ever presenting sponsor for the NBA. So those are the places you can watch if you have one of those streaming bundles, which, as we've talked about, I think maybe 3 episodes ago on this show, that slowly these bundles, when you add it up with Netflix and Amazon Prime and HBO, it's all of a sudden in the next couple of years, you're going to have Disney too, and maybe even another one or anything like that, and Apple's new streaming service, that these are going to all become a little bit, maybe even more than you were paying with just traditional cable. But I don't want to get too sidetracked. And then this year, we're going to get into a little bit more of the unique ways you can watch. So the NBA Digital, which is a joint production between the NBA and Turner Sports, is offering, you can watch League Pass on both the NBA app and Turner streaming service, which is Bleacher Report Live, which they just now call BR Live. So you can watch either the big overall package, or you can do the smaller, just team-specific packages for out-of-market fans. And then, interesting enough, just a little side note for Bleacher Report Live, if you've never heard of it, they have the U.S. rights to the Champions League, which is the big international soccer tournament that happens throughout the season, which I think is a pretty big deal in my opinion. They've been advertising it pretty heavily over the last couple weeks or so, because I'm a pretty big soccer fan, and I was looking for Champions League highlights earlier this season on ESPN, and they were nowhere to be found. So I Google searched Champions League highlights, and the only place I could find them with access to based on living in the States was on Bleacher Report. So good for Turner and good for Bleacher Report. And then also, funny enough, if any of you have heard about that thing that's now kind of been lost for until it happens, but that Tiger Woods versus Phil Mickelson matchup that is going to supposedly go for charity or something like that, that $10 million game between Phil and Tiger, that's going to be exclusively on this Bleacher Report live the day after Thanksgiving. But yeah, so this might be the coolest part because I've now become so adverse to commercials that I will sometimes, if I want to watch a game, I'll watch it like on 30 minutes delay and just fast forward through some of the commercials. This year, there's going to be an option for NBA League Pass holders to spend more to be able to not watch commercials. Obviously, you're not going to be able to watch, like they're still going to have commercials because there's TV timeouts and there's just timeouts in general. But instead of having to watch commercials, you can pay extra to just have an in-arena view. So you'll just get to watch what's ever happening in the arena, which I can definitely see being something that people are willing to pay for, because I know as you watch more and more Netflix and Amazon and Hulu that you just don't want to see ads anywhere. So I think going forward, this is definitely an experiment that could prove to be something that is really viable option going forward, and that a lot of people are going to be willing to pay for if it is available in more places. And then you have the ability to pay for single games on for NBA TV. And then there are also these small micro payments, which I've talked about before on the show, which I really do think the NBA is ahead of the idea of just being able to pay $1.99 to, I want to watch the fourth quarter. And that going forward, there's going to be even more options to, I can pay $1.99 to watch the first quarter or the second quarter, especially when you have all of the sports betting going on, or I'm going to pay 99 cents to watch the last 5 minutes, all of that stuff. And it's going to be, it sounds so cheap. And I think that's really how they get people, they're going to get people to spend a lot of money, is that $1.99 sounds not bad, but then it probably, if you're doing this a lot, it could really add up to where you might start thinking about just actually paying for League Pass. But I do think it'll be a great way to bring in even more money to the NBA. And I could, down the line, I could see a lot more live sports companies do this, especially when it becomes a streaming platform only. I mean, you can't really do this on TV at this point, but for streaming, to buy just the fourth quarter or the second half of any of these games, and maybe even the NFL could experiment with that going forward. But as I said, it'll be huge for sports betting, and the NBA has been on the forefront of this betting push, and they even became the first league to have an official corporate partner, which is they are not just a corporate partner, an official casino partner. So they have an official gaming partner, and that is MGM Resorts. They signed a multi-year deal with MGM this summer. So basically, as soon as it wasn't completely illegal everywhere but Vegas, the NBA jumped all over it. It's unclear exactly what this is going to be. It's going to be a lot of cross promotion between MGM and the NBA. But really what MGM's paying for now is the rights to access the NBA's data, because the faster they can get this is the official NBA data, it's for live in-game betting. That's the whole premise. That's where all of the betting's going, is live in-game betting through your mobile device. So that's what MGM wants to do now, is get ahead of this, and they want to build a relationship with a company in a league that they really see being at the forefront of this betting revolution, which is surely likely to take place as more and more states make sports betting legal. And I want to just close with a little bit of a look ahead on top of all this stuff we've just mentioned with micropayments and sports betting. You have the NBA has an official 2K league, which is an esports league. Then you have Amazon Twitch covering that league. And then you also have Amazon Twitch covering the G League, which is the NBA's developmental league, which they're now even pumping more money into. And they're trying to maybe even get ahead of what some people think could eventually be the answer to this one and done problem that college sports have, well, specifically college basketball, but where you have all these young, talented players who can no longer go right from high school because of the rule that's been implemented. So you have to go to 1 year of college. So they're going to now have a new thing starting soon that offers select players who would go to college for that one season to then be drafted in the NBA, come right out of high school and go to the G League and get paid $125,000. Like I said, instead of going to college. But I really don't see that being a viable option just yet, especially for that money. And as bad as it sounds, a lot of these top players, as we found out with last year's big FBI scandal, they're getting paid a lot of money anyways, somewhere upwards of $100,000 to go to these big-time college programs. And there's just much more prestige around these college programs. They're flying on chartered jets. They're playing in sold-out arenas on national TV. The G League is being streamed on Twitch where not many people are watching, and you're flying early red-eye flights and all those things where I think for now it's going to be really hard to lure the kind of player they're expecting, which is those high-caliber one-and-done guys. I really don't see the G League getting those people yet, but maybe they'll get some guys who would be two-year college players to go to the G League right away. And then the NBA, unlike the NFL and like soccer, has a real international appeal because America is pretty much the only place that plays American football. That seems kind of all too obvious to say. But the NBA has opened 12 international offices. They have 7 academies on 4 continents. Their games are broadcast in more than 200 countries and territories. And specifically, I think that China, and this isn't some new opinion to me, this is just facts, China and India represent the biggest opportunities, with China being already in that growth phase now at the moment. Reportedly, 190 million fans streamed the NBA Finals in China, and 750 million people watched just NBA basketball in general, and it's by far the most popular sport in China. It's also the most popular and most followed sport on social media in China. And then I'm going to just close with a look, and it's going to sound too simple, but it really does encapsulate how the NBA is capturing this younger audience where the NFL is trending in the wrong direction. And this is just on social media quickly. And Twitter has its own NBA Twitter commercials. The NBA, unlike the NFL, has been open about putting out as many highlights on every social channel as possible, where the NFL doesn't want any highlights anywhere. They want you to have to watch all of the games live, which I obviously think the NBA is in the right direction on this, because people want to see the highlights, and then they'll be more inclined to be a fan of your sport. Whereas if you're being stingy, these billion-dollar businesses that are being stingy with their highlights just seem so petty to me. But then in terms of just Instagram, which once again sounds too easy, but I really do think it shows just kind of where these sports are diverging at the younger millennial youth level. So the NBA has 31.4 million followers on Instagram. That's 2 million more already than it had during this past year's NBA Finals, whereas the NFL only has 12.4. So 20 million more than the NFL on Instagram, which is a millennial-driven platform owned by Facebook. And I really, as I've said now, it kind of says all you need about the direction these two sports are headed in at the moment. And I think the business of the NBA is going to be one that in 20 years, companies are going to want to be a part of, maybe more than the NFL. I wouldn't say that today. I think the NFL is and that's not even right. The NFL is a bigger business at the moment than the NBA is, but I think long term, the way these leagues are trending, the NBA is going to be where you have more opportunities as a business, as a corporate partner, and as an investor of any kind to be in 20, 15, maybe even 10 years. But that does it for another episode of Full Court Finance. Until next time, I'm your host, Ben Rains. And remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot us an email over at podcast@zax.com.